The wind across Caldus III's blasted plains carried a silence too thick for any world that once knew life. What had once been a colony of brilliant domes and laughing children was now shattered under the weight of memory and flame. The skies hung heavy, clouded in smoke that never dispersed, as if even the sun had turned its face from the horror of what had happened here. Sergeant Elias Grant had been walking these ruins for 3 days, his mission reduced from reconnaissance to aimless wandering, the signal beacon crushed with the last quake. His suit's filtration systems clicked quietly, a hum he barely noticed anymore. What he did notice, what made his heart hammer and the back of his throat go dry, was the tiny figure curled beside a broken shuttle shell. She couldn't have been more than 7. Those species lines made guesses dangerous. Pale skin shimmered, with a translucent hue, as if her blood ran different from his. Her eyes, huge and black with no whites, blinked once at him before narrowing into slits of instinctive terror. Her arms too thin, wrapped around her knees, and her breath was so shallow he thought at first she might be a hallucination. Elias crouched slowly, one hand raised, the other instinctively reaching to disable his helmet seal. It was dangerous. Here, the air was poison to many, but something in her stillness demanded he meet her with open skin, open eyes. "It's okay," he said, voice cracking as the outer shell retracted with a hiss. The air was dry, acrid, burned with ozone and chemicals, but survivable. "I'm not here to hurt you." She didn't move, but her eyes followed him. Something trembled just beneath her, not fear, but something older, deeper. Loss, he saw. It instantly recognized it from the mirrors of refugee camps and war fronts in crumbled cities. She wasn't just alone, she had been left. Her mouth opened, barely, and a soft clicking sound emerged. Not speech, not human. He didn't understand, but he didn't look away. He simply sat beside her, letting his presence be the answer. To a question she didn't know how to ask dot around them, the ruins whispered of firestorms and orbital bombardments, of promises broken by politics, of peace never meant to last. The Alliance had claimed Caldus III was secure. They had been wrong. The girl's skin bore the faint shimmer of the Alari, a species known for their song-like speech and reclusive culture. Elias had only ever met 2 in his life, both diplomats, both unreadable. Yet here this child, covered in soot hair, matted with ash, eyes wide with ancient knowing, had been left to die. Forgotten dot, he wanted to ask questions, but the weight of silence between them was sacred. Instead, he pulled a ration bar from his belt and unwrapped it carefully, laying it beside her. He didn't push it into her hands, didn't gesture, just offered it. She stared at it for a full minute before the smallest fingers in the universe reached forward and touched it. She sniffed it, nibbled, swallowed. Her hand didn't stop shaking, and then, without warning, she moved. Crawled, slowly, awkwardly, into the space between his knees and chest and folded herself there, like a creature finding shelter under a tree during a storm. Elias froze, heart skipping, eyes stinging with sudden wetness. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just placed her head against his chest plate and listened. Listened to his heartbeat as if it was a language she understood, a rhythm older than war. He wrapped his arms around her without thinking, carefully, not tightly. Just enough to let her know she wasn't alone anymore. That night, Elias didn't sleep. The fires had long died, but the stars above offered no comfort. Somewhere in the dark sky, the war still raged. Somewhere, his commanders thought, him missing, maybe dead. Somewhere, this girl's family had made their last stand, or worse, fled without her. He didn't know, but here, in the ashes of Caldus III, a soldier held a child not of his blood, not of his world, and knew with terrifying clarity that he could never walk away. Not now, not ever. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Elias built a shelter from the twisted wreckage of the downed shuttle, working slowly, methodically. As the little girl watched from her crouched place beneath a fractured wing, she had not spoken. Not in any words Elias knew. Yet her eyes clung to him like vines to stone, desperate, watchful, searching for something, maybe reassurance, maybe proof that he wouldn't vanish like the others. He knew that stare too well. It reminded him of the orphans back on Mars. After the dome collapse, how they'd learned not to cry because no one came for tears. Only survival mattered, and even that was fragile. So he moved with a gentleness he hadn't used in years, setting up makeshift walls, weaving insulation, cloth into a ceiling, even placing his emergency thermal pads in a circle like a nest. He was trained for combat, not for comfort, but something in his chest wouldn't let him stop until she looked a little less like a ghost dot at dusk. When the greenish light of Caldus's dying sun bled across the broken skyline, she inched closer. Again, Her feet were bare, cracked with dust. Her long fingers held something, a shard of ceramic, painted with blue and silver markings that shimmered in the firelight. She offered it to him wordlessly. Elias took it carefully, the edge still sharp, a plate, a piece of a home, a grave marker. He turned it slowly in his hands, then nodded, placing it near their small fire as if it were sacred. The girl said nothing, but her lips parted just enough to show the edge of teeth flat, like a human child's, but spaced wider. Her jaw not quite the same, close, familiar, and so very alien. That night, she didn't sleep away from him. She pressed close under the thermal blanket, trembling only once, when the wind howled like a beast across the hills. Elias laid one arm over her shoulder, murmuring nonsense songs his mother sang, stories he half remembered, names of stars. She would know, it didn't matter. She listened. She breathed. That was enough. By morning, she spoke. It wasn't language, not in the human sense, but soft whistles, harmonics that shifted in tone, like a bird learning its call. The translator chip in his suit flickered uselessly. Too little data, too few samples. But her hands moved to gestures, signs, touching her chest, then pointing at him, then curling her fingers as if mimicking a heartbeat. He watched, heart pounding in time with her mimicry. She was trying to understand him. Trust him. I'm Elias, he said slowly, pressing his hand to his chest. Let Laz. She tilted her head, blinking. Then she pressed her palm to her own chest. Sorry. A whisper like wind in dry leaves. Sorry, she said again, firmer this time. He smiled, aching all over from something he couldn't name. Sorry, he repeated softly, as if naming her gave shape to the bond already forming between them. The next days were slow, stretching in silence and long treks across broken land. Elias carried her when her feet bled. He wrapped her in his coat when the cold bit through their makeshift shelter. Each time she stumbled, she reached for him. Each time she cried soft, nearly silent tears that left glowing streaks down her cheeks, he held her until she slept. There were no ships, no beacons. Just a man and a girl on a dead planet, surviving on instinct and memory. One morning, she brought him something. A glimmering flower, growing impossibly from the cracked stone of an old walkway. It pulsed faintly with bioluminescent threads, utterly alien, utterly alive. Sari placed it in his hand and looked up with something almost like hope. It took him hours to realize why the sight broke him. She still believed something beautiful could grow from all this ruin. The next night, as he stared at the stars, he wondered if humanity had done that to her world, if the bombardments had come from orbit, if some bureaucrat had labeled her people collateral, like so many others before them. The thought made his stomach turn. He was a soldier, but he'd never imagined being part of something this cold. And yet here she was, still trusting him, still curling into his arms at night, like he was a harbor in a storm she couldn't name. They found a half-functioning outpost 10 days later, empty but partially powered. He rerouted a distress signal, knowing it might take weeks to be heard. If it ever was, but it gave them light. A stove, a cot. And in that quiet, wounded little shelter, Elias finally wept. For her. For whatever happened here. For the part of him that was changing, word by word, gesture by gesture. She sat beside him, not speaking, just placed her hand on his heart. And stayed. In the flickering warmth of the half-lit outpost, Elias began to teach Sari how to smile. Not with words, she still couldn't speak his language, and he had only fragments of hers, but through moments, soft gestures, shared silences. At first, it was a game. He would make a face, exaggerated and ridiculous, puffing out his cheeks, crossing his eyes, pretending to fall over with dramatic flair. And slowly, she began to copy him. Not with full laughter, not yet, but with small, tentative curves of her mouth that grew more real with each passing day. There was a music in those nearly smiles, a language of trust older than speech. He felt it growing between them, each glance a thread binding two broken hearts across species in grief. He discovered she liked the sound of rain. Not the rain. Itself called us three storms were cruel and sudden, acidic and harsh, but the recordings he played from the ship's archive, Terran storms, gentle and rolling. She would sit for hours, curled against the metal wall, eyes closed as if memorizing. The rhythm. He didn't know if her world had rain. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it used to. But the way she leaned into the sound, as if it stirred something in her blood, told him it wasn't the water she longed for. It was the memory of peace. One evening, as twilight bled across the horizon in ribbons of blue and fire, Elias handed her a simple necklace, a band of synthetic cord with a single tooth hanging from it. A relic from Earth, a wolf's tooth. He had kept it through a dozen deployments, a reminder of home, of instinct, of family. She held it reverently, fingers stroking its curve as if it were made of crystal. Then, after a long moment, she pulled. Something from beneath her tunic, a narrow shard of metal, etched with alien script, its edges smoothed from years of wear. She placed it in his palm, eyes shining with unshed tears. No translation needed. This was her piece of home. Her memory. Her pain, and she had given it to him from then on. They shared their wounds in pieces like puzzle fragments too fragile to name. He told her of his sister who had died on Titan after an atmospheric breach. Told her of how he joined the Terran force not to fight, but to protect what was left. Told her how some nights he woke screaming, seeing the faces of comrades buried. Under rubble, under fire. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tremor in his voice, the way his hands curled into fists when he spoke of loss. And in return, she began to hum soft melodies, eerie and beautiful, rising like wind through hollow trees, songs of warning, of memory, of love too late. It was during one of those quiet evenings when the world outside was silent, but not yet dead, that she curled into his side and whispered something he almost didn't catch. Mama. He looked down, and she was staring not at him, but at the stars through the cracked ceiling window, her small hand reaching upward. Mama, she said again, and the sound cracked her voice, her body trembling with the weight of what couldn't be undone. Elias didn't speak. He just held her tighter. Then she looked at him and for the first time touched his face. Not bad, she said haltingly, and he blinked. Not because of what she said, but because it was in English. Broken, but unmistakable. You're not bad. You stay. It was so simple. So small. But it shook something inside him he didn't know was still tender. He wanted to ask her everything. About her people. About the day the world ended. About why she had survived. But he didn't push. Instead, he pointed to himself again. Elias. He said gently, friend. She smiled, then truly smiled for the first time. A slow, radiant expression that melted through the grime and the scars and the foreignness. And she pointed to herself. Sorry, stay friend. That night, they ate together like a family, sitting cross-legged with the ration packs warmed over a flickering heat cell. She mimicked his every move, how he chewed, how he stretched, even how he sighed after eating. And when she reached for his hand and intertwined their fingers, he didn't flinch. He held on, and when she fell asleep beside him, nestled into the crook of his arm, Elias stared at the ceiling and realized the ache in his chest was no longer grief. It was hope. Asterisk. The outpost's power flickered again. The low hum of its emergency. Generator groaning in protest. Elias had grown used to the inconsistency. Power was a luxury now, not a guarantee, but this time the disruption came with something else. A sound, a sharp metallic ping from the comms console that hadn't lit up in weeks. He dropped the metal panel he'd been repairing and stood. Sari looked up from her drawing she'd taken to scratching shapes into the dusty floor with a nail. Strange glyphs he couldn't read, but knew were important to her. She saw his face change and stood too, her wide black eyes filled with alertness. He approached the console slowly, cautious, as if a ghost might rise from it. The signal was faint, barely more than static, but it was there. A low-pulse beacon, alien in tone, not Terran. Not Alliance. Something older. He tuned it carefully, isolating the frequency, his fingers trembling slightly as he brought it to clarity. The voice that came through was hauntingly melodic. Like a song half-spoken, it wasn't English. It wasn't any human language, but Sari ran to it. Ran to the console like it was a lifeline, her hands pressed flat against its metal surface. Her mouth moving, repeating the words as they spilled out. She wasn't just mimicking. She was responding. Elias sat beside her, stunned. She was talking to someone. Someone like her, someone alive. Within moments, the signal cut again, but the look on Sari's face had changed completely. The sadness wasn't gone, but it had pulled back like a tide, revealing something buried beneath. She turned to him, her fingers trembling as she touched her necklace, the wolf's tooth he'd given her. Then she gestured to the window, to the sky. They come, she whispered. Elias blinked. Who comes, Sari? She pointed again. Ship, not bad. Then her voice lowered and her face twisted with something darker. Others, come too, bad ones, hurt everything. She tapped her chest. My people not fight. We run, hide. Her face collapsed a little as she searched for the right word. Not win. It took Elias several minutes to make sense of it all. The voice had been a signal from another survivor, possibly a ship, searching for those who were left. But the real twist came in Sari's warning. She wasn't just from a species caught in a war. She was from a species targeted in silence, wiped clean by a force too efficient, too deliberate. Not the chaos of galactic war. Something worse. Something planned. He began pulling up logs from the outpost's old system's corrupted files. Fragments of encrypted communications. It took hours. Sari dozed on the cot, exhausted from the emotional storm, but Elias kept working. And finally, the truth stared back at him from the cold screen. The Alari had refused to join the Galactic Trade Accord. Peaceful, emotionist, they had declined the offer of integration. Their world held a resource, organic crystalline matter that powered long-range warp cores more efficiently than anything else in the quadrant. When they refused to sell it, they were labeled difficult. When they blocked extraction, they were labeled threats. The mining companies weren't officially tied to any government, just mercenaries, just contracts, and so the fire fell. The bombardments hadn't been war, they'd been cleansing. The worst part? No one stopped them, no Terran fleet, no alliance. Sanction. Only quiet, complicit silence while a gentle people vanished from the stars, and Sari was proof they hadn't all died. His stomach turned, bile rising in his throat. He thought of the tooth necklace around her neck, of her songs, of the way she touched broken things like she could fix them if she just believed hard enough. He stood, his hands trembling with fury. Sari awoke, blinking in the dim light. She saw his face and sat up quickly. "You see?" she asked, reaching for him. "You know now." He nodded. "Yes, I know." Her eyes welled with tears again. "You go? When ship come?" That stopped him cold. He knelt before her. "Sorry, I'm not leaving you." "I don't care who comes." She stared at him for a long moment, then pressed her forehead to his. A gesture of her people, he learned. Intimate, trusting. She whispered a word in her own tongue, low and beautiful. It sounded like forgiveness and sorrow wrapped together. That night, the sky lit up not with falling stars, but with real ones. A ship broke through the cloud cover, sleek and unfamiliar, its silhouette unlike anything human. Sari stood at the door, staring up, whispering a prayer he didn't know. And behind that ship, far darker and farther away, were shapes that didn't belong to peace. They weren't just coming to rescue, they were coming to finish what they started. And now, Elias had a choice. Stay hidden, or stand between them and a child whose only weapon was trust. The rescue ship landed just beyond the ridge at dawn, its hull gleaming like obsidian glass, etched with flowing lines of bioorganic material. It moved like it was alive, its landing gear unfolding with a softness that didn't match its size. Sari stood beside Elias, trembling but resolute, her small hand clutching his, as they watched the vessel settle into the poisoned soil of Caldas 3. She hadn't let go of him since the signal was received, even now with hope breathing through the ash-laden wind. But Elias could feel something in the air, an invisible thread pulled taut, humming with danger just beyond reach. Then they came. First as a shimmer in the atmosphere, then as screaming contrails of metal slicing through the sky. 3 Hunter-class ships, matte black and narrow, like daggers thrown by a vengeful god. No insignia, no warning. Just the roar of approaching violence. Elias had seen these ships before, in classified reports, in field briefings that spoke of private security enforcement units. But everyone knew what they really were: sanctioned ghosts. Tools of silence. Tools of erasure. The mercenary ships didn't hesitate. They opened fire not on the Alari rescue vessel, but on the land, on the outpost, on the wreckage, on the witness, on Sari. Elias didn't think. He grabbed her, threw her over his shoulder, and sprinted. The heat from the blasts licked the edges of his armor, the tremors beneath his boots making his teeth rattle. Behind them, the shelter that had become their home burst apart in a cloud of flame and memory. The drawing Sari had scratched into the floor, vanishing in the inferno. Without ceremony, they reached the ridge seconds before the second wave of fire hit. He slid down into the valley, his lungs burning, his mind already calculating. The Alari ship had activated its defensive shield, a soft, glowing dome of pale light, beautiful, but not strong enough to withstand another full assault. And the mercenaries were regrouping for another run. Inside the dome, the air changed. He was greeted not with suspicion, but with reverence. Tall Alari emerged from the ship, taller than Sari by a head, but with the same eyes, the same translucent skin, the same quiet sorrow. One of them rushed forward, pulling Sari from his arms with a cry that sounded like mourning. Sari clung to her, sobbing a single word over and over. "Mama." Elias staggered back, chest heaving, arms empty. The woman, her mother, looked at him over Sari's shoulder. Their eyes met, and he saw everything in that look: gratitude, fear, and something deeper, something almost like pleading. A second Alari stepped forward, robed in pale silver, marked with intricate glowing tattoos. A leader, perhaps. Or a priest. They looked at Elias with somber calm. "You brought her home," the voice said, translated through a hovering eye sphere. "You kept her heart alive." Elias opened his mouth to respond, but the ground shook again. One of the enemy ships had landed behind the ridge. The shield would fall within minutes. He looked back at Sari, at the way she held her mother, her small body trembling with exhausted relief. And he made his decision. He turned to the leader. "Get them off-world, now." "You must come too," the AI translated. He shook his head. "You won't make it if they keep firing." "But if I can draw them away," he trailed off, already scanning the terrain. His voice lowered. "I've fought these bastards before. I know how they hunt." Sari's mother moved forward, eyes wide. "You would sacrifice?" she asked, the words struggling through translation. "No," he said quietly, looking at Sari. "I'm choosing." He walked to the edge of the dome, every step heavier than the last, and pulled out the old comms beacon he'd rigged days ago. Still intact. Still dangerous. He opened the frequency wide. Then he ran, across the plains, screaming his own location into the void, cursing and roaring. Like a madman. A human, unarmed, alone, baiting the wolves away from the lambs. The mercenaries took the bait. He heard the engines scream behind him, felt the ground shudder as fire rained down not on the ship, not on Sari, but on him. They thought him foolish. They thought it would be easy. But Elias had buried traps beneath the soil power cells from the outpost, rigged to explode on proximity. He dove into the ruins of an old coolant bunker, just as the earth behind him erupted in light and fury. One ship down. The other two circled, disoriented. And in that confusion, the Alari ship rose. Sari stood at the window, face pressed to the glass, watching him vanish beneath fire and smoke and sky. He didn't look back. He just whispered her name one last time. As the comms cut and the air turned to flame, asterisk, asterisk, the blast shattered the sky, sending a column of fire into the heavens as if the planet itself had howled. The first mercenary vessel, caught by Elias's makeshift minefield, cracked in half before vanishing in a wash of flame and twisted steel. But there was no time to celebrate, no breath for relief. The other two ships wheeled above the smoke, like vultures scenting a wounded beast, recalibrating their targets. Smarter now, angrier. Beneath the scorched ridge, inside the broken shell of a coolant bunker, Elias coughed blood into his glove and forced himself upright. The explosion had flung him against the concrete wall, and his left arm hung useless, seared along the forearm, his armor plating cracked and leaking coolant fluid. But he was alive. For now, the pain wasn't the worst he'd felt. Not even close. What hurt more was knowing they might still reach the Alari ship before it could escape orbit. His earpiece sparked with static. Then a soft tone broke through Ilari code, refined, trembling with urgency. A message from the ship. A voice. Gentle and fracturing. "Sari cries for you. She sees fire but not your light." Elias gritted his teeth, rising on one good knee, then standing fully. He couldn't tell her he was okay. He didn't know that he was. But he could still move. Still fight. He pulled the last two charges from his belt-modified ion detonators. Short range, but devastating in close quarters. He stared up at the ridge, where one of the remaining mercenary ships was descending low, hunting for movement, its sensors crawling over the terrain like insects. If he could get under its belly, he might have a chance. He staggered out into the open. They saw him immediately. The ship turned. Engines roared to life. Spotlights swept across the landscape like accusing gods. A high-pitched tone began lock on. Sequence. He had seconds, maybe less, but Elias didn't run. He planted his boots into the ash, raised both arms wide, and roared at them, not with fear, not with madness, but with every ounce of human defiance left in his soul. "Come on, you bastards, I'm right here." The ship fired, 3 plasma rounds arcing through the smoke, but he had already leapt into the trench. He rolled, landed hard, then crawled beneath the wreck of an old hover drill, now smoldering from earlier fire. The ship followed, descending, fast, trying to corner him, unaware of the 2 charges now stuck to its exposed landing gear. With one last breath, Elias whispered, "For Sari," and pressed the trigger. The second ship went down in a storm of light and screaming metal. The shockwave blasted the landscape clean for 100 meters, tearing the air apart. The final ship, circling above, hesitated, just for a moment. And, in that hesitation, the sky answered. The Alari ship, now rising fast beyond the upper atmosphere. unleashed a pulse of energy from its belly, some final act of defense, ancient and beautiful. It wasn't a weapon in the human sense. It didn't kill. It revealed. The last mercenary vessel's systems blinked, exposed. Their coordinates, their affiliations, their signatures all laid bare across the stars, recorded, witnessed, condemned, the ship broke off pursuit, vanishing into the void like a shadow afraid of its own reflection. Silence returned to the ruined plains of Caldas 3. Wind swept ash across the craters. And in the center of it all, half buried beneath scorched wreckage, Elias Grant lay bleeding, his eyes unfocused, his body broken but smiling, because he had done it. He had stood between them, and they had lived high above the planet. Aboard the Elari vessel, Sari clutched the viewing glass, her small body shaking with more than fear. Her mother knelt beside her, holding her tightly, whispering in the musical tones of their language. But Sari kept looking down, even as the planet turned small beneath them. Even as stars replaced the horizon, she had seen Elias disappear in the flames, and she had felt something crack inside her that no child should ever feel. But she also saw the fire he'd lit before he fell, a fire not of destruction, but of resistance. He didn't need to speak her language to say it. He didn't need to be her kind, to be her protector. In that moment, Sari wept not because he was gone, but because someone who didn't have to care had loved her enough to burn for her. Time passed on Caldas 3, though the wind no longer carried voices and the dust buried more than bones. What little remained of the outpost was quiet now, the scorched earth healed only by the echo of memory. The wreckage of the mercenary ships rested under the blood-orange sky, scattered like broken teeth. In the center of it all, beneath a cracked piece of hull plating and a collapsed bunker wall, the body of Elias Grant was found not by machines and not by enemies. He was found by those who came looking not for survivors, but for the story they had heard whispered across systems. The tale of the human who stood alone against warships. The one who shielded a child who was not his. The one whose life carved a warning into the void. Some things are worth burning for. The Elari returned, not in silence, but in mourning procession. Their ships landed without sound, and their robes dragged long threads of silver through the dust. Sari walked among them, now taller, older, her face no longer the round innocence of childhood. But her eyes still held the same deep black, the same slow light of memory. She stepped out into the wind and knelt at the place where he had fallen. Her fingers brushed the soil. Then she placed something into the ground, a small worn wolf's tooth, tied with a bit of frayed cord, a gift returned to the earth. Behind her, others knelt too. Not just Elari, humans, diplomats, soldiers, survivors. Word of Elias Grant had reached the stars, not as a report or a headline, but as a legend. And legends, when true, become more than stories. They become reasons, reasons to change. Reasons to try again, the Elari sang. Their voices rose like wind through crystal, like the echo of a river through stone. It wasn't a dirge. It was a song of remembering, of bond, of blood given in kindness, not conquest. Sari sang the loudest, though tears streamed silently down. Her cheeks, her voice no longer trembled. It commanded. Later, when the wind had settled and the ashes drifted soft and low like snow, a small monument was placed at the center of the crater. Not a statue. Not marble. Just a standing shard of metal from the wreckage, etched with human and Elari script side by side. Here stood one who chose love over escape and fire over silence. We remember, and we are more because of him. In the years that followed, peace didn't come easily, but it came. The massacre of Caldas 3 could no longer be hidden. The transmissions Elias triggered, the identities exposed, the truth made visible through death, forced a reckoning. The trade accord fractured. The mercenary groups were tried, some scattered, some executed. Human and Elari diplomats stood side by side in the halls of power. One of them was Sari. She wore his tooth still fashioned into a brooch now, gleaming beneath her robes of white and starlight. She spoke not with bitterness, but with clarity, with compassion. She never told the full story. She didn't need to, because those who had heard it already carried it in their bones. One day, on the anniversary of the rescue, a small girl Elari in shape, but with her father's eyes, stood at the base of the monument and reached out to touch the engraving. She turned to her mother, confusion in her voice. Why did he stay when he could have gone? Sari knelt beside her, brushed the girl's hair back gently, and smiled the way only someone who has lost and still loves can smile. Because some people don't run from fire, she said. They become the light that shows others the way. Out. Far above, in the stars that had once been silent, A single beacon pulsed forever Elias Grant's final transmission. Left untouched, never overwritten, not as a warning, but as a promise. Humanity, at its best, was not steel or war or conquest. It was this. One broken man, holding a child who didn't look like him, and choosing to be her shelter.